That's been funny about this whole thing is that, like, I mean, inside baseball, I'm sure people can tell. We're just filming this on my phone. We have these little,
sitting in our
plug-in
living room.
microphones. Yeah, it's not very high production. It's just more about having a good time. Yeah.
Sure.
So the question for today, if you could have dinner with any famous person, who'd you have dinner with?
All right. We won't talk about Jesus, but we'll move on from there. How about
Okay.
that? Okay.
Yeah, that's the cop-out answer.
That is a cop-out answer.
You know what, also, we know you don't really want to talk to Jesus. You want to talk to someone else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but you feel obligated. If you're a Christian,
if you're a believing man,
yeah.
if you're a God-fearing man, you got to say
that
Jesus.
first.
Yeah, no.
So now that we got that out of the way and said that first.
Yeah. Now that we obligatorily, yeah.
There's quite a few on my list, but probably I like to think of people that have changed history.
Okay.
In an area that I like,
Uh-huh.
So I'm thinking one of my favorites. It was one of my dad's favorite players, baseball players.
Okay.
Was Hank Aaron.
Yeah, Hammer and Hank.
Yeah, and we went when Shelly and I went.
Why did he like Hank Aaron so much? What was
I don't know. I think it was
Yeah.
his consistency. Hank Aaron never had like a 50 home run season.
Okay, he was just so good for so long.
I don't even know if he might have had 140, but the rest of them were like 38, 30, 35, and he just did it for like 25 years.
What like era did? Because it's not like Hank Aaron was like a huge player in your dad's time. You know what I mean? Because I feel like
so. I think he likes Hank Aaron because Hank Aaron would have been the time when he was playing too.
Oh yeah, okay. Because I don't know. I don't know if we've told that. Maybe we can rehash it. Grandpa Jerry got drafted to play in the Major League Baseball.
Yeah. So my dad was a huge baseball player down in Beaumont, Texas, down near the coast.
Big city, Beaumont.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
And Beaumont. Yeah. So it's really close to
just kidding.
Beaumont.
Just get
it's
worse
close
and
to
worse.
Louisiana. So it's part of that whole thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and he got drafted out of high school, and it was either the Cincinnati Reds or the Pittsburgh Pirates, one of those two.
Okay.
But he got drafted twice, so that's why I know those are the two teams.
Yeah.
And out of high school, when he got drafted, he was one of two players on his team that got drafted.
In Beaumont.
At Beaumont High School.
At the same time.
And they offered the kid.
They must have been smoking everybody with those two dudes, huh?
Yeah, they were a good team.
What was your dad's deal? He was just a power hitter, huh?
He could smoke it, yeah. He could just hit it a mile. And
you were about to say hit it a country mile, weren't you?
A country mile.
What is a country mile?
I think it's like longer than a mile because
like a baker's dozen is actually 13.
Yeah, because in the country there's nobody in between that mile, and it feels like you're going forever.
Yeah, a country mile is like 1.15 miles or something.
Yeah, I think it's actually a mile, but it feels longer.
Sure.
Yeah, and so there was the other kid that got drafted. They offered him a signing bonus of like $2,000, and this is 1957. So that was a big money back then.
1957, okay.
Yeah. That's when my dad graduated. And the team that drafted him offered him less, and I don't remember how much it was, but it was significantly less.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad said, I'm better than that guy. My stats are better, I'm better, I'm better. I want more than him or I'm not signing. And they wouldn't pay him more, so he didn't sign.
Do you think that team that drafted that other guy just had more space in the budget to give him or something?
Could have.
That's crazy.
Nobody knows the answer to those things,
Yeah.
And
I just speculate, I wonder.
Yeah.
Right.
So then he joined the Air Force almost directly after that, and he played for the Air Force baseball team.
Did Grandpa fly?
No.
He's a mechanic or something?
No, he was actually actually communications.
Okay.
So he was part of, I guess, back then it was communicating long distances. They had all these codes and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was what he did, and I never heard much about it. Although I do, he spent some time in Libya, and at the time Libya was like the Riviera of Africa.
Okay.
And so he was back then.
It was paradise.
It was paradise. It was before Gaddafi and all that stuff went on.
Okay.
And so Libya, they were thinking Libya is going to be the next, like Hawaii or
sure
French Riviera or something.
Yeah.
Until it kind of fell apart
because of corruption and all that stuff.
He's told me a lot of stories about Libya, and he's got a lot of pictures of that.
That's cool.
Yeah, but the reason he got drafted out of the Air Force.
Where do you think those pictures are? In a shoebox? And
I've got a manila folder with a bunch of stuff in it that he sent me.
Okay.
But I'm not the oldest son, so I might not have gotten the best stuff.
Oh.
You know what I mean? I got all the baseball stuff
Because you were the biggest
I was
baseball
the
guy.
biggest baseball fan.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So
We got to call up Uncle Curtis and see if he's got any of that other stuff.
yeah, I don't know if he would or not.
Yeah.
I think I'm the only guy that really held on to. I don't know. They might.
Yeah.
They might.
Yeah, or I mean, Pam could still have a bunch of it too.
Yeah.
You know.
So yeah. So my dad talked about when he was a kid, he loved watching Mickey Mantle.
Yeah.
Because one of his stories was when Bo Jackson got big. You know, Bo Jackson played professional football and professional baseball and was an all-star in both of them.
Yeah.
And
Nuts.
I told my dad one time, have you ever, I mean, there has never been an athlete like Bo Jackson. And he said, yeah, there has. I said, who's that? He said,
that?
Mickey Mantle. I said, Mickey Mantle didn't play football. He said, don't matter. The dude was big, strong, fast as a rocket. And he said, if he would have stayed healthy, he would have been, and Mickey Mantle's obviously one of the greatest ever.
Yeah.
He said he would have been the
Even
greatest.
with
Yeah.
the disease, he's still one of the
So,
greatest
yeah.
ever.
Well, no, he didn't get the disease.
I'm thinking of Lou Gehrig.
Lou Gehrig's disease. Yeah, he might have got
Dang.
Mickey Mantle's disease, which I think was alcoholism.
Yeah. Man, did you hear about?
Yeah, he died of Mickey Mantle's
Did
disease.
you hear about Dave? He came down with a bad case of Mickey Mantle's,
Mantle's
disease.
disease.
What is that?
Yeah, just drunk all the time. Yeah.
What's the term? It's cirrhosis. They just renamed that to Mickey Mantle's disease.
Oh yeah, because
Is that what
means your
cirrhosis
liver
is?
gets just
Yeah.
floating in alcohol or
Mickey
something.
Mantle's disease.
Yeah,
What a dummy.
yeah. So we should that wouldn't be a bad idea, to just start naming diseases after the player who might not have died of it, but certainly had those real sicknesses,
Yeah. How long it's? You know what? I'm not gonna make the joke. I'm gonna make.
You want to make a joke, but you're
Yeah,
not,
I was. It's a little. It might be a little bad taste.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna. Make
And I
it. I'll
think-
tell you off camera what I was gonna say.
There we go. But I think the reason he liked Hank Aaron so much is that Hank Aaron was also, I think he kind of had the same style as my dad.
Sure.
He was a power hitter, played left field. My dad played left field.
Yeah.
So a lot of things lined up for my dad.
So Hank Aaron would have been playing, I guess, in the '60s and '70s, huh?
When my dad was probably really watching a lot and just dreaming about if he could have been there.
If I had been there,
Yeah. But he didn't sign the second time he got drafted.
because he already had a family at
He
that
already had
point,
a family.
right?
Yeah. He had, I think, one son, another one on the way, maybe.
Dang.
And so he didn't. He
What
didn't
could have
end up
been?
playing. Well,
Everything
know.
works. Everything goes the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So here's the
Yeah.
question then: if you're gonna sit down and have dinner with Hank Aaron, right?
Yeah.
Who just passed away like a year ago,
It
right?
hadn't been too long ago.
Not too long ago.
Yeah.
What do you ask him? What do you talk to him about?
You know what? I'd have to sit down and think about it. I'd have to.
Well, off the top
really-
of your head, what do you think you would ask him?
I would probably ask him about how he, because I was a big thinker when I played baseball too,
sure.
and apparently that's what he was. Because
Okay.
I read some stories about him trying to get into hitters counts, which is a 3-1 situation,
Where they had to throw him a strike.
where he could predict what they were going to throw.
Yeah.
So you knew he was thinking through the game,
Yeah.
and so I would probably
He wasn't a
ask him
see
lot-
ball, hit ball guy.
No, yeah. He was a guy who was looking for specific pitches and
Yeah.
and was watching and playing the game cerebrally,
Yeah.
which is like I think my dad thought that's how he did it too. And he
Gotcha.
taught me to do it too because my dad taught me how to score a game by the time I was 5 years old, so I could get a scorecard. And I passed that down to you.
Yeah.
We'd go watch games.
I would need a review if we did it again, but I remember you teaching me at
Yeah.
a Ranger game.
Right, we'd have a little card, and you'd
Yeah.
know where everybody.
Backwards K is a strikeout where the guy didn't swing.
There you
I remember
go.
that stuff.
There
you know?
go. Yeah. So I mean, and it's that's part of the joy of going to a game, which you and I went to quite a few
Yeah.
Ranger games back in the day.
Yeah.
And I still have the scorecard from. By the way, Jackie Robinson would be another one that I'd be really interested in chatting with
Yeah.
because I'd like to hear.
The history. I mean, that dude's.
Yeah.
I mean, he is the history of baseball.
Yeah, and I would like to ask him how did he hold himself back from just whooping up these
Oh,
dudes,
yeah.
man?
Yeah.
Because they were taunting him and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so it's so funny.
And obviously, I know the history of Jackie Robinson. Right, breaks the color barrier in baseball. And I haven't seen any of like the movies they've made of him.
Right.
But is that a big part of it that he just never? He always kept his cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's fascinating to me because when you're playing sports and you're being competitive,
Yeah.
guys can get under your skin.
Yeah.
And you want to fire out, and they were
Yeah.
really getting. I mean, they were doing everything in their power.
Yeah.
And he was still an all-star and just so dang good.
Yeah.
So dang. And
Yeah.
he, obviously changed. The funny thing is the other one that popped into my mind is
Well, if
golly.
you know what you think about,
Something's wrong with me,
thinking
man.
about Jackie Robinson, he didn't just like break the color barrier for baseball. He essentially broke it for all American
Kinda,
sports.
sorta, yeah.
Because we don't know who broke the color barrier for football or basketball because there was none of that because
Right.
Jackie Robinson already did it basically for all the sports.
It kind of seems that way, and I'm
Yeah,
sure
I'm sure there is
knows.
somebody, right? Yeah. I'm sure there is somebody, but like America, I mean, baseball is as old as America itself.
Right.
It seems like, you
Right.
know, and so
It
the
goes
first
way back.
the
to
first guy to
beginnings.
break the color barrier in that sport will have kind of done it for everything, you know.
Yeah, and the other one that popped into my mind is Martin Luther King, which is how funny is it that there's 3 black guys that I want to talk to, and I'm trying to think who's the white guys,
Yeah.
They don't come right to my
Yeah.
mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I mean, you think about it, all the other ones, you're like, I mean, if you have to pick one from each category, right? If you have to pick a musician, it's going to be Prince. You
Yeah,
know?
probably
If you have to
so.
pick a boxer, it's going to be Tyson. You know what I
Tyson,
mean?
Yeah.
If you got to pick a
You know,
basketball,
Muhammad Ali would be awesome
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Another black guy.
Yeah.
What are we doing here?
I mean,
Yeah.
you can't pick what's interesting to you. You
I
know, it
I
is what
know.
it is, right?
Well, and yeah.
Yeah.
I guess whatever you like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with Hammer and Hank, I just like. By the way, you're gonna hear me say Hammer and Hank over and over because I think
great.
it's the coolest.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that's one of the only things I know about the dude, and I like it. You know what I mean?
Right.
You'd kind of ask him about his baseball strategy.
I would talk
and-
about strategy. I would want to know
Yeah.
about how he handled slumps or what he considered to be slumps. I would want to know, who his favorite teammates were. I would want to hear some crazy stories about pitchers, like the combat with pitchers. Back then, the pitchers would throw at dudes, and he's the guy that they would throw at.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
And the umpires would be like, "Well, that's part of the game." You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like they wouldn't. No one got tossed back then. You know?
Yeah. You could hit a guy,
Yeah.
and you could fight and go back and play.
Yep. Yep.
There's some pretty famous.
Time for the fifth inning fight. You know what I mean? Like that was just part of the game.
The benches would clear, guys would be bleeding, and they'd go back out on the field and
they
finish
would
the game.
take a big old wad of dip and they would go back to it.
But I think probably
You're giggling because I stretched my lip out. That's what you're laughing.
Yeah, you did. You stretched your lip out, and when you did that, it reminded me of shoving.
Big League Chew or whatever.
No, I never did. I never could chew bubble gum and play. It bugged me.
Okay.
Because it would dry my mouth out. But I would always do the sunflower seeds, and I remember tucking sunflower seeds in there to pretend like it was. Because they wouldn't. When you're a kid, they're not going to let you do.
When did they outlaw that, by the way?
I don't even know.
Okay.
I don't even know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I would want to hear baseball stories.
Sure.
Because those are cool to me.
Yeah.
And baseball is a
Was
game.
Hank Aaron the over the head catch too?
No,
Who
that
am I
was Willie
thinking
Mays.
of? Willie Mays. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was Willie Mays. And I have a little Hank Aaron character.
Yeah, with that throwback Atlanta Braves jersey
what
on.
A great. Yeah.
What a great jersey, man.
Yeah. And before that, I think it was the Milwaukee Braves he played for
Oh,
them
okay,
first.
okay.
And then they moved to Atlanta.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool, man.
So he's in the Atlanta Braves outfit. But yeah, those are the guys I would want to. And to me, it's about we do this podcast and we tell stories about.
Yeah,
things.
yeah. So I was thinking about this question.
Yeah.
I said if you could bring him to dinner, but really it's honestly who's the ideal podcast guest, And maybe it's a little too early in our run as podcasters to be thinking about that. But that's why I asked you.
I don't know if I'd want Tyson on a podcast. He's on so many podcasts.
Sure. Yeah.
But I would want Jameson.
Jameis Winston? Yeah.
I'd want Jameis
We've already
Winston.
talked about how much we love
A
Jameis
little
Winston.
bit, yeah. But I'd want to hear stories from him.
Oh, yeah.
Because his perspective is going to be,
Well,
I think, would
I don't
be
know if we
awesome.
put this out here the last time we talked about it.
Yeah.
But one day, the goal of Dad Chats is to get Jameis and his dad.
Because I looked up, after we talked about him, I looked him up, and he's on Facebook. Jameis Winston's dad is on Facebook.
Yeah. So one day,
Love to have the two of them
if you're
on
listening
there.
to this episode, which is episode 20-something, we're very early, right?
Yeah.
We're putting it out there. We're using the secret. We're throwing it out into the universe.
Right.
One day,
putting it in the ether.
yeah, one day we're gonna have a real nice studio, and we're gonna have Jameis and his dad, and we're gonna ask him about the first time they threw catch together. We're gonna ask him about the first time.
Yeah.
The first time Jameis's dad saw him run a touchdown in or pass for a touch. We want to talk to those
Golly,
guys.
Can you imagine? Yeah. You know, and when you see your kids do things,
Yeah.
it's more fun to watch them than it is to do it yourself.
What did it feel like when you saw Jameis win the Heisman? You know,
Yeah.
like the national championship.
Jameis played baseball too. He was a good baseball player.
I bet he was.
Yeah. So
I bet you any of those dudes could have played 9 sports in high school and been good at all of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think
Those guys are
Jameson
nuts.
actually played college baseball too. I
Okay.
don't think he stopped
For
at high
Florida
school.
State?
I think it was Florida State, or
Yeah.
maybe he got drafted. I don't know. A lot of those.
Yeah.
A lot of those quarterbacks play baseball.
Yeah.
A lot of them, and even
Yeah.
professionally.
I know. Didn't Mahomes get drafted and he decided to go football instead?
Yeah, the quarterback for the Kyler Murray played professional
that's right.
baseball.
Oh yeah.
So did I think his dad did too.
Golly.
I think his dad, Kyler Murray's dad.
By the way, we're not opposed to having Kyler Murray or Mahomes and their dads on as well, but
know
Jameis
what?
is number one on the call sheet.
Yeah, just because he seems like he'd be
Yep.
so much fun.
Yep.
He'd be so bubbly and just.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever seen him on that kind of. You know, some of these guys.
He did Theo Vaughn's podcast, and it
did?
was Jameis. I'll pull it up on YouTube after this, and we'll watch it together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it was awesome. Yeah, I would.
I bet.
I would love to meet Jameis and
Golly,
stuff.
that's cool.
Yep.
I didn't know that. Well,
Yep.
I'm sure. Who would you like to?
Well, my first answer, first and foremost, is Kanye. 10 years ago.
Gotcha. Pre something.
Yeah. Kanye when The Life of Pablo came out.
Okay.
Right, 2016.
Okay.
Maybe, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe even up until like 2018, 17, 19 kind of, you know what I mean?
Before that, because he
well,
went
because
into
if
a
I
different
interviewed,
phase of his life.
if I had him down for dinner, if we sat down and had dinner now,
Yeah.
he's got some he's got some ideas he's going
Yeah.
through,
Yeah.
and that's not what I want to talk to him about. You know what I mean?
You want to talk about the genius Kanye and the music,
yeah.
And didn't you do a college?
Yeah.
What do they call that? A dissertation or
No,
a project?
dissertation. I wish, man. That would have been
project?
awesome. I took a public speaking course.
Okay.
And we had to do, the whole curriculum is doing, different types of speeches, right?
Okay.
And so you do an impromptu speech, you do a teleprompter speech,
Okay.
you do a how-to speech, and then one of them was a convincing speech,
Okay.
right? To convince. And
Okay.
I did mine on. This was in 2016.
Okay.
And I was trying to convince everybody that Kanye is the creative genius of our time.
The best part is, you went to a pretty.
I went to a goober Christian school. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
So you get up there and this is your
Yeah.
presentation.
And whatever you're picturing was in the classroom, you're correct, by the way. You're correct. Yeah.
Lily White,
Lily White. Yep. Yep.
except for some maybe African kids that had transferred in.
Yeah,
Some of
there
that,
might have been
maybe
one
a few
African
Hispanics or
girl in that class,
Okay.
but I only remember the Lily White kids in that class.
And I'm guessing the professor was pretty much the same as well.
Yeah, but you know what? That guy was awesome.
Was he really?
He was, because, and this is one thing I liked about
Did you
college.
convince him?
You know what?
What was your grade, I guess, is the question.
I got an A on it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had, I'm not trying to, be arrogant or whatever, but
Yeah.
I've always felt pretty comfortable speaking in
sure.
front of people,
Yeah.
And I think that's 90% of public speaking.
Yeah.
Is, it's probably 50-50. If you have a plan, is 50%, and be confident is the other 50%.
Right.
And usually you'll be in pretty good shape.
Right.
No, this professor, he was awesome because he was an anchorman for the local television.
Oh, okay.
For the local TV station, right?
So he'd
this is
been
a guy
through
who
that.
knew what he was doing,
Gotcha.
know? And he had reported on everything, and he was older, so it's like he knew that there was more to the world than just this classroom,
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean?
Sure.
And I'm sure he liked, he had been teaching that class for who knows how long, so I'm sure he was stoked to see someone do something that he hadn't heard before, you know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, Kanye in like 2016 or 17,
Okay.
just so I can ask him, and I watched, he came out with like a 3-part documentary a few years ago that, talked about him trying to get a record deal for the first time.
Right.
And I only saw the first part of the 3-part documentary, but there was there was this part that like really, really impacted me.
Oh.
Right, of him sitting down with his mom, right, and it was all footage that he had like it was almost like he had planned. He knew one day they were going to make a documentary about him, and so he had already
He was documenting a lot of his life.
Yes, yeah,
Gotcha.
and that's the kind of dude he was. He knew there was no other choice for
Right.
him but to be a famous musician, right?
Right.
And there was this part that like really, really impacted me, where he's sitting in his mom's little condo, right? Him and his mom are sitting in the kitchen of their condo, and she says, "Baby, you remember that one song you did?" And she rattles off the first line of it, and then he just starts going, right? It might have been something he had done in high school, for crying out loud.
Right.
But two parts of it impacted me, right? Number one, that he could remember it and he knew it down to a T.
Yeah.
And the other part is that, you know, who knows if his mom had been real stoked on him being a rapper. I don't know how she felt about that.
Right.
But she loved him so much, she picked the things that she liked and she remembered them so that she could relate to him and love him for it. You know what I mean?
That's great.
And as someone who has also lost my mom at this point,
yeah.
I would love to sit down and talk like, dude, tell me all your favorite stories about when your mom loved on you.
Yeah.
And me and him could connect over that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know. Maybe that's ridiculous. But then I'd ask him about some of the other stuff. You know, because everyone wants to talk to him about the politics of it. Everyone wants to talk to him about his story. You know, I would want to get down to like I don't know that much about music, and so I could honestly just use it. Dude, just teach me about it. You know what I mean? Like help me understand.
How does your mind work as you think through this stuff?
Yeah. Because I mean, I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure I could go look it up.
Right.
You know, but I haven't heard any clips of him talking about that part of it. You know.
Right.
And maybe he can't even vocalize it. Maybe it just happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it flows through him or something. But
yeah.
I'm unapologetically a Kanye fan. You know, he's having some issues right now.
Huge Kanye fan of his music. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Anybody else pop to mind pretty quickly for you?
Right now,
and we should probably, before you do this, we should probably let everybody know if it could be anybody, I'd have Shelly, right?
Sure.
My wife.
Sure, yeah.
And probably second to that would probably be my dad, who I lost as well.
Yeah.
I mean, but when you said it, those.
Well, I said famous people, so I did qualify
it. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. No,
so your second person is
Well, right now, and you know, I've been working. If you only know me from listening to these episodes, you wouldn't know I'm working on a short film right now. Right. That's one of the creative outlets I have, It like kind of coincides with right now the final season of The Righteous Gemstones is coming out or has come out, right?
About that. Yeah.
And I've talked to you about this.
Sure.
And so, you know, trying to make a short film, I've really identified a lot with Danny McBride, right? And he's been on all these podcasts, and so I've been able to learn a lot about him.
Right.
Just because, you know, nowadays when someone has something new come out, they might go on Jimmy Fallon, they might go on the Today Show, but they hit the podcast circuit.
Yeah.
Right?
Because more people are listening to that anyway.
Yeah. So I've been able to hear Danny McBride talk to Theo Vaughn and Mark Norman and Sam Morrill and Conan, right?
What I like about the podcast scene is they don't even talk about their project. You just get to know the individual, and then you want to see their
And then at the very end, they go, by the way, Righteous Gemstone is premiering on HBO. You know what I mean?
And
it's the bomb.
But you get to liking them.
Yeah.
Because you get to seeing who they really are.
Yeah.
And then, which is interesting also because there's also some movie stars and musicians that don't go on those things because they're really unlikable people.
Yeah, or
and
they're not that interesting.
They're not that interesting.
Yeah. But Danny McBride, so I've already learned a bunch about him from like seeing him on other podcasts, you know?
Right.
I know that, you know, he went to film school with no intention of ever being an actor, that he wanted to write and direct, you know?
Right.
And that I know that his dad worked as a prison guard and they lived on a facility 50 feet off of the prison guard, you know?
Wait a minute, he lived 50 feet away from the prison?
Yeah, and he told
Danny McBride did?
Yeah, as a kid.
Imagine the stories he's got.
No, I know. He's told him on the podcast, right?
Really?
He said one time in the middle of the night an alarm went off.
Yeah.
And his dad pulled a gun off the rack and jumped out the house and jumped into a pickup truck with all of his buddies' friends, dads, who also worked at the prison.
To go chase down the prisoner.
To go chase down a break, right? Like, he's got those stories, right? So I've learned all that stuff about him.
Sure.
You know, I've learned about the first time he acted and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
But I would want to do the inside baseball stuff with him,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because I'm writing and directing the short film, you know, that, stay tuned, I'm sure it'll be on the page at some point, you know?
Yeah.
So I want to ask him about his process. And at this point, he's done Eastbound and Down. He's done Vice Principals, you know?
Right.
And he writes and directs all that stuff, you know, on top of being in it, you know?
And you're into that. You're
and
into
I'm
the
really
writing.
into that right now,
Yeah.
you know? That's like the
Right.
thing that I'm most into right now, you know? I don't have expectations that it'll ever go anywhere. It's just for fun. It's just something I really, really enjoy. But I would want to get into the weeds with it on, like, hey, what's, in your experience, like, what's the best way to craft a story? You know, how do you, you know, talk me through the whole, like, you know, the bell curve of a story, like how, you know, I've written short films that can only be 10 to 12 minutes long, right? But you're writing full seasons of shows, right? So we're talking hours of content to tell one continuous story. Like, how does that work, you know? Like, and on top of, like, the story and the character, he also writes comedies, right? So take me through.
Probably gonna have some fun.
Take me through the process of writing jokes, right, and balancing, you know, storytelling versus joke telling, you know, because you don't want to. I know you don't make dramas, you know what I mean? So like so. But there is, like, really, really impressive storytelling elements to your shows. So take me through the process of telling a compelling story, but also making sure the jokes per minute don't dip. You know what I mean? Because I know that's what you're interested in, right?
Because you've heard him talk enough to know.
Well,
he's about the jokes per
he's a
minute.
comedy writer. You know what I mean, right? And I know that he's got, like, I'm sure they have big round table discussions, and he's got a bunch of people helping him and stuff. But, like, take me through the process of that. You know, what comes first, right? The jokes or the story, or vice versa. You know, I would really want to get into the actual filmmaking part of it with him.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've learned so much about him recently because he's doing the podcast circuit, and I would love to learn more about him. He's kind of like one of those guys that has become in a way kind of like a hero of mine.
Yeah.
Because he does the thing that I really, really love right now.
Yeah.
And he does it in a way that, you know, he said this a couple of times on the podcast, you know. They ask him, like, how do you know what the people are going to want, you know? How do you know what's going to be popular? And he's like, he said, well, when we made Eastbound and Down, there wasn't anybody telling us, hey, you know what would be really cool right now is a semi-racist, over-the-top drug addict baseball player.
Gotcha.
He's like, we just made it, and we knew we liked it, and then people liked it, and, you know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you know, I kind of find myself in that same thing. Like, the thing that we're making, there's no guarantee that anybody's going to be stoked about it, and nobody asked for what we're making.
Right.
But so how do you balance that? You know, there's all these kind of, like, inside baseball stuff for filmmaking that I would really like to ask him.
That's interesting, because it's the stuff that we want to talk to the people who, you know, you say he's kind of a hero, and I think because my dad liked Hank Aaron and I dug into him as well, it's kind of the same feeling along those lines, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but also, he's a hero in baseball, right?
Yeah.
And what he did, and I really don't see other people as heroes in, like, different ways, you know?
Sure.
For instance, Martin Luther King, I'd be curious about how he created, like, the following and how he did. That's interesting, the leadership and all that, right? Because I'm always, there's 100,000 books on leadership, and they're always written by people who have people work for them. And I always ask this question: stop paying them, see if they keep working for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a leader.
And Martin Luther King Jr. was a preacher, so
nobody was paying him.
Yeah. Well,
they were following him.
Yeah. He wasn't paying anybody.
He wasn't paying them.
Yeah.
But they were following it. That's a leader right there, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, and I'm always interested in that. You know, not that I ever aspire to be a big leader of men.
Sure.
But I like the idea of influencing people for good and that kind of stuff. And so, watching what he did, I'm like, I want to peel back the curtain. You know, inside baseball. And were you thoughtful in this, or were you just led by? Was it led by God, or you made decisions?
Did it just flow from you, or did you make conscious decisions
did you pray
on that?
every day before you made big decisions? How did that work, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious how that worked, you know?
Yeah.
Which is interesting that you and I, we're religious, but we're not like in your face religious, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I like to think my religion is very personal to me. So I don't throw it at people.
Yeah.
Right? But I have deep religious background.
Yeah.
But how is it that, you know, our heroes aren't religious? Not only are they not religious, some of them are wildly unreligious.
Unreligious. Yeah.
Which is interesting to me that we can, I guess people who are watching us that think that religious people are zealots, you've kind of figured out not at all with us.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Which is why, like, sorry to say, but like Jesus probably wouldn't be that high on my list. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's because I don't, you know.
He would be on mine for sure, but
you know,
but I know what you're
like
saying.
it's hard for me to say that it wouldn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, in a way, I feel like I wouldn't even know where to begin with the Savior of all mankind.
Yeah.
You know?
Might be uncomfortable in his presence. Almost.
Yeah. And if he did tell me something, I'd be like, get a load of this. I can't even understand what he's saying. You know what I mean? Like, he goes, the presence of, and I'm just like, I don't even know, you know? Like,
wait, are you speaking a parable I got to figure out later?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm supposed to decipher this later?
Or he shows up for dinner and he's like, you guys got the naan bread and the fish? And I'm like, well, no, we made steak tacos, you know? Like, I don't even know what to feed it, the Savior of all mankind.
You'd really clean your house too, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And even if it was a dirty house, he'd probably come in and be like, this is a nice joint, because that dude lived in mud huts his whole life, you know? What does he know?
What does Jesus know about a big house?
I probably shouldn't say.
No, but I know.
I probably shouldn't say, what does he know about the King of Kings,
but
you
the
know?
idea that you're sitting, you're right, though. The idea of sitting down with him is, I don't know if I could focus on the questions or what I wanted to ask him, because I'd be like, did I say my prayers last night?
Yeah.
I might be running through how guilty I mean, you know, you don't really know, right?
Yeah.
But
that's why a dude like Danny McBride is higher on my list, because, or at least, you know, higher on the easy to talk about list, because there's something to, and even Kanye, as off the wall as that dude is, me and him could sit down and talk about what it feels like to lose our moms. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's a connection there that I feel like would be a stepping stone to.
You know what? That would be a fascinating, because I've had a chance now to talk to a lot of people who've lost loved ones, and they don't know my story.
Yeah.
And then they find out, and they call me back, and they're like, "I didn't know, Kyle." And I say, "Well, how do you think I can have these conversations with you?" And they're like, "I feel bad now." Don't feel bad. It's made me more empathetic to their situation, because I've experienced, right? And I think they feel that, but they don't know that I've had that tragedy in my life. So it's really interesting. But yeah, that would be, I'd like to be on a fly on the wall just to hear that, and I'd like to sit down and listen to you and Kanye have a conversation, because I'd like to hear how he sees it.
I also feel like,
and
this is not me trying to aggrandize myself as some kind of amazing interviewer, but everyone wants to talk to him about the music and the fame and what's it like to be married to Kim Kardashian. You know, but if I sat down with Kanye, it'd be like, I don't even know if I would tell him right off. I'm like, dude, I saw this thing in the documentary, and I could feel how much your mom was your biggest fan.
Yeah.
Right? Like, tell me stories about that.
There it is. And you know what that sounds like? There's a TV show on, it's like where they eat hot wings, I think.
Yeah.
That guy asks questions that are
He's the
unreal,
bomb.
man.
He's the bomb. Yeah. But even on that show, he probably wouldn't ask that question. You know?
Right.
Because, and that's why probably the better question is if you could sit down to dinner with somebody, not who's the best podcast.
Yeah.
Because the podcast by its very nature is the industry of eyeballs. It is the industry of clicks, right? So you got to do something that's tantalizing to viewers.
Right.
So that's why if you could have dinner with somebody is a better question.
It would be a different conversation.
Yeah, because I'm not worried about asking him the things that are going to, you know, put eyeballs. I'm asking him the questions that like are really important You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it would be the same thing. I'm sure 99.999% of the population would be really bored with the questions I would ask Hank Aaron.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
Or, yeah, they
Yeah.
really would.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just would be like, why is this guy asking if these are
Yeah.
stupid? That's not what we want to hear.
Yeah.
There's no juice here, but for me there would be, because it's a passion of mine.
Yeah.
And and there's
Yeah.
I would feel a connection, but more than anything, kind of through my dad, the connection through my dad to
Yeah.
him, and then me
And
researching it.
like thinking, like the guys that we're talking about get told all the time that they're somebody's hero. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, it's almost like, think of how happy it would make you to tell Hank Aaron, my dad loved you.
Yeah.
Right? And it would mean more to you than it would to him,
it would,
obviously.
yeah.
But like, say, dude, you were my dad's favorite player.
Right.
And it was through you that we like developed a love of baseball together.
Right.
And he would tell me about you and stuff like
and I
that.
have a little statue of you.
Yeah.
Let me see it.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. And I think it's I guess it's about what your interest and what you're passionate about in that moment.
What else do you think? Like baseball, right?
Yeah, music for me would be Prince. I'd have to sit down with him and just ask him.
What's the inside baseball thing you'd ask him about? You know what? I know what your question would be.
What's that?
You're like, Prince, I don't want to talk about baseball. I don't want to talk about music right now.
Yeah.
I want to talk about basketball.
Yeah, you know what? Because he was a basketball player.
Yeah. And I heard he had a handle.
I heard he could play.
Yep. But
Yeah.
see, that's if I had a famous person to talk to, I would want to ask him the questions that I think nobody else is going to ask him, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm not some savant reporter journalist, so I'm sure they've been asked all these questions. But imagine being able to sit down and have dinner, a plate of pancakes with Prince.
Pancakes for sure.
And ask him about playing hooping.
Yeah.
That's the stuff you would have, right?
Right. And does he really have a vault of music that that he doesn't want ever to be released? And tell me about how you developed this whole compound you had, and why did you do that? Did you just think you could just tell somebody to go get you a camel in the middle of the night and it would just happen? Is that the way it worked?
Yeah, what
made you want a camel?
Yeah. Was it like
true?
And try to psychoanalyze them a little bit,
Well,
Is that a power complex thing that you decided to develop, or is it or is there something else there,
Could you not go to the zoo? Because people would
yeah.
maul you at the zoo,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things going on there.
Yeah.
But with Prince,
and then
it would
Prince
be-
goes,
it
well,
would
I
be-
knew if he went to go get me a camel, then he didn't think I was crazy if he did it, and he was there for me and not for my money. Yeah, I don't know, like, is
I'm
there
glad
something?
you did a Prince.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
It's gone off the rails.
Sorry, Prince. Sorry, Prince's estate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, both
yeah.
big fans. Big fans. As a matter of fact, I have very few lapel pins, and I wear a suit to church every week. But I have a little Prince head. So when I decide to go with purple tie or any of that, I have my little Prince. And it's so funny at church because people will walk up and look, and they think initially, a lot of them think it's Elvis until they see it's not Elvis, and they're like,
Yeah.
Some of them know.
Uh-huh.
Is that Prince?
Yeah.
Which is when somebody at church catches you in your carnal loves, it's always funny to see their reaction.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it for me.
Yeah, that's funny.
I like my music way too loud, and Prince is a big part of that.
Do you think you go deep history on anybody? Like, would you want to sit down with like Magellan or anything, or Aristotle? By the way, I just said Magellan because
I don't think I could. He's the one that like
circumnavigated the globe. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, so much has been written about them and everything. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's my deepest passions. You know?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, there have been guys that changed the world. I mean, the leader of England during World War II would be pretty fascinating. Why did you make these decisions? I'm going to go back to leadership, right?
Sure.
Why did you make these decisions? What made you think this? What made you think that?
Yeah.
But I can't really think of. I'm trying to think. I'd have to think about it.
See, that's interesting that you go leadership, because I go the things I'm interested in or the hobbies that I have.
Yeah. Well,
and so if I went deep history, the first guy that pops in my mind is like having dinner with Shakespeare.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
As someone who likes to write and stuff.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. And I'm trying to think of like what would I ask
Well, I
him,
think mine would be influence. Is probably
Sure.
That would be if there was one word you could
Yeah.
put on it. Somebody who influenced major things, or
Yeah.
because I like the idea, and I know I'm not, like I said before, my design is not to be a leader of men, but I know just on my own little basis, I'm interested in changing people.
Well,
one
the
person at a
men who
time,
have like influenced history, they had something like mentally figured out.
You think? I mean,
Yeah.
I wonder how many of them were flying by the seat of their pants.
Yeah, maybe more
and
of them
just
than we
made
would've
the
thought.
right decisions.
And if that's the case, then that's actually kind of cool because you're like, well, then I have a chance.
Maybe I can do that
Yeah,
too.
maybe just by doing what I do, I can figure something out.
Yeah. We went to dinner last night, and a team showed up. It was a team of young men,
Yeah.
and they all had matching blue shirts on. And I said, "Are you guys?" I thought, because my son plays rugby and he was out of town.
Yeah.
My other son, Jack, and I thought they were a rugby team. So I saw the guy who looked like the coach. I said, "Is this a rugby team?" He said, "No, they're a volleyball team that plays for the Portland Community College." Shout out to the Portland Community College.
Shout out the wasn't the Chargers, the Panthers. Shout out the Panthers.
Yeah. And so they were all sitting around waiting on.
Yeah.
the
By the way,
table.
as soon as he said volleyball, you looked around. You're like, oh yeah, these dudes are volleyball players.
Right.
Yeah.
You could see the tall ones. You could see the ones that were quick, that were digging stuff out.
Yep.
And so there's like 9 or 10 of them in one little corner, and I said, who's the best jumper on this team?
Yeah.
And they all turned to one guy.
They knew
right?
the one guy.
And
yeah.
it just having
By
that
the way,
conversation.
how telling is that of volleyball dudes?
Oh yeah.
Because
they
if
know.
you ask, what I'm saying is, if you ask a basketball team, who's the best shooter? 4 dudes will be like, oh, it's me. You know what I mean? Like, they all want to claim it. But I don't know. I feel like there's something culturally about volleyball where they go, it's that dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it started an entire conversation with me and these guys, and it's my own little personal way of just
Connecting
with people.
Yeah.
And so I like that idea.
Yeah.
And it brightens me, Yeah. And that's what it's all about, right? Brightening me.
Yeah, I do it for my own. Yeah.
But I'm sure these guys were like, that knucklehead asking us who's, because then another kid came in and said, I get higher on the net. He's a little taller, but I have a higher vertical. And so then that conversation started among them.
Yeah.
And then one guy called the other one by his nickname, and there was just banter.
Yeah.
And you can see how much fun they're having together. Right?
They must have just won, by the way.
They were in pretty good mood.
They were in good spirits. Yeah, they
or
must have.
they understand what competition is, and it's just a goal.
And they were just like, dude,
having fun on a trip
it
together.
stinks we lost, but I'm about to drown my sorrows in some boneless wings. You know what I mean? And they were stoked for the boneless wings.
Yeah. Which is a good way to drown your sorrows after you lose.
Heck yeah.
That's a good question. I
Cool.
like it. Yep.
All right. Well, we'll finish up there, and we'll see everyone next time.
See you next time.